Okay, just doing a quick follow up on the music article I had published recently. And I think we can see the Total Gym in the background here. Little shout out to Total Gym there. Okay. Um so there were a couple video uploads to YouTube that I wanted to mention. Um Turns out Basil J. Hiley just did a new presentation with his collaborator, the neuropsychologist, I think I would call him that, out of Finland. I'm not even gonna try to pronounce his name because I'll just hack it up. But at the very end of their talk, the Finnish scientist, I think it's, well, again, I won't say his name, but he says that David Bohm said that music was a way to access directly the nonlocal quantum potential. And so obviously that was a great corroboration of my recently published article on music and quantum physics and meditation. And so Basil J. Hiley did not go into the non-commutativity a lot in that talk, but he's talking about consciousness, and he gets into biology a bit, and he relates it back to they're basically doing an overview of their book chapter article they had published a couple years ago, 2022, in a book on quantum consciousness. So he's relating it to his PhD research on phase changes as a second order phase change that turns out to be mathematically intractable, what they call intractable. And he doesn't go into the details on the math, but he's basically saying that then when he corresponded with Karl Pribram, that was also how Karl Pribram had modeled the brain for his holographic brain model. And then he also mentioned he was at a conference with the guy who had done brain studies on people with encephalitis, with basically they were missing almost all of their prefrontal cortex, but they were still able to do mathematics. And so that kind of corroborated the holographic brain model, which is that somehow the information of our consciousness is embedded non-locally, which you could consider to be like almost the soul being expressed through the brain. And of course in meditation, this would be in Taoism, it's what they call the Wan Qi, which is this original cosmic Qi that emanates out of the third eye, the pineal gland. And so I will link that Basil J. Hiley talk that was through the Paris Center, which is associated with Pete, another physicist who studied nonlocality. I think he was a physicist. Maybe he was a psychologist or something. And then philosophy of science physics professor Tim Maudlin was interviewed on special relativity a few days ago. And it's a really great explanation of special relativity. It's like straight and to the point. It just cuts through a lot of the confusion about like the twin paradox and whatnot. And he's talking about how basically in relativity you have a different definition of space-time as a light cone. And because of the light cone, you're limited to the speed of light. And also any line in that cone is the actual timeline. What I think he called it. What was the word he used? But he said it's defined by length, and therefore it's not acceleration. And this is actually a key point because Einstein was relying on basic algebra for the speed of light as a magnitude. So basically that's why you're using length for the actual timeline. And so he's saying, just as an analogy, you just think of time as like an odometer, and there's absolutely no difference with that. You could, in the same amount of time, you could just take a longer path, and therefore you would age longer because the time is defined by the length of the path. Because you're working in 4D space-time where the time is interwoven with the light cone. And since the speed of light is defined by the actual electromagnetic definition of space itself, as a void with no matter in it. So that was very fascinating. But at the very end of the talk, the interview, he's asked about quantum physics, and he also promotes the Bohmian quantum potential, what they call the Broglie-Bohm model. And he doesn't mention Basil J. Hiley, but I've emailed with Professor Maudlin a little bit also, and but he says that any of these quantum field theories they're wrong because they're not really relativistic quantum physics, and the reason is because of Bell's inequality, which got the Nobel Prize a couple years ago. I think it was 2022. Basically disproving Einstein, and so that the foundation of reality is again this simultaneity that is non-local and instantaneous and faster than the speed of light. And Tim Maudlin says this is causal. It's a causal, what they call a correlation, but it's not random. And that's what Bell's inequality proved. So you have some kind of, it's not a signal, but it's what Basil J. Hiley calls active information. So this gets me to the crux of what I want to talk about, which is Basil J. Hiley's research on the quantum Zeno effect. And I just did a blog post on in Basil J. Hiley's talk, his recent talk. He cited a paper of his on the Stern-Gerlach experiment, and what that proved using the quantum potential is that there's no quantum jump or quantum measurement problem if you're using the quantum potential instead of the standard Schrodinger wave function or wave mechanics. So this is a really crucial point because in quantum physics they have this whole problem where this is what bothered Einstein, was that they have to rely on statistics for probability when they actually measure the location of the particle. So you have this amplitude squared, but what the quantum potential shows is that what they call probability flows, or the amplitude probability before it's squared. It's also called the transition amplitude, or it's the phase of the amplitude. So you have the phase being the frequency as inverse to the time. So in terms of the quantum Zeno effect, what Basil J. Hiley and his collaborators have proven is that the quantum potential is just the time as inverse to the energy, which is frequency directly proportional to the momentum. And so when you have that ratio being less than 1, so you have a 1 over E as energy, and so the 1 would be the time. So this brings you directly back to the time frequency ratio of music theory. And he's saying that when that ratio is less than 1, then that prevents the collapse of the wave function. And so what would normally be considered to be a random, unpredictable process becomes a flow that's like a straight line. He gives an example from Heisenberg's work with this scientist named Mott, where they had wondered about some sort of radioactive emission in a cloud chamber that's with water droplets, and it's supposed to be random, but it wasn't random. And so the reason is when you have a frequency of energy that's high enough, then it's the equivalent of making a constant measurement against the time of the evolution of what would be the probability flow in the Schrodinger wave function, which is the operator of the wave function. And so when you apply the operator to the wave function, you're getting this evolution in a complex time with the imaginary phase. So it's basically like a cubic time. And because it's cubic, therefore you have this negative frequency in the exponential. Basically, like you're normally in Fourier analysis, you're using like the sine and the cosine for a wave oscillation, but it's easier to just use the complex number as a exponential using Euler's formula. And so that's why you have the imaginary number as a negative frequency, which is just a phase reversal. And that's how you end up getting this precognitive proto-consciousness, as Roger Penrose calls it. So basically, that's how you do meditation, is when you're able to have these precognitive visions, if you're able to increase your frequency enough through turning the light around as you listen to the source of the light with your eyes closed. That then increases the frequency of the energy. And so that's another reason why Roger Penrose calls it passive information as free will, because it's before any classical amplitude measurement of energy. And so Basil J. Hiley also calls it formative cause from from Aristotle. So it's this phase is a like a fourth dimension of space as a field that overlaps the future and the past. So in terms of quantum physics, it's instantaneous, but then in terms of relativity, it's precognitive or superluminal. And it's not a classical signal, but it is an active information because it's not random, and it's defined by this time-frequency ratio. And I won't go into the music theory, but I'm just wanting to point out this quantum Zeno effect. Basil J. Hiley's big point is you don't need any measuring apparatus. It's just the energy, its frequency itself. As long as that frequency is high enough against the time, then it causes that ratio to be less than 1 over energy or time to frequency. So you end up getting this quantum entanglement that's maintained. And so normally in the quantum potential model from Bohm, you would say that at the macroscopic level, the quantum potential vanishes because the time goes to 0. It goes to the limit in the second order of the derivative or something. I don't know, the math, but he's saying that this is the Planck's constant squared, or h bar squared, which is basically the 720 degree spin. It's what they call the quantum 2 sphere. Because it's non-commutative, you're taking the negative frequency and the time reverse signal and combining it with the positive frequency and negative time so the future and the past overlapping. But in terms of music theory, it's based on this time frequency ratio, so it's very easily just the 2/3 and 3/2 non-commutative ratio. So the 3 is G as an overtone and then F as an undertone. So you basically have G equals 3 equals F, which is a logical paradox. But that's what creates the non-commutativity. And that's why Alain Kahn calls it 2, 3, and infinity. And that's his basic equation for the whole non-commutative formula of reality. So it's another way of understanding the quantum Zeno effect. And then it also explains why in meditation you're able to have precognitive visions and go into the past of people's past lives, even if you go into a deep enough level of meditation. But since we've been all brainwashed by Platonic commutative geometry that everybody learns by 14 years old, they learn the Pythagorean theorem, and it's basically like materialistic idealism and symmetry, and it's all based on a visual perception, and so people are easily fooled by that. And so then they lose contact with this secret music understanding of meditation. And I will leave it at that. And I'll put the links to the Tim Maudlin and Basil J. Hiley talks. Thanks.